The lake wind tangled my hair as I stepped onto the pavilion. Her voice hit first. "She's just the maid," Karen said casually, like I was invisible. Laughter bubbled near the wine bar. My name wasn't on anyone's lips, but I had the invite, embossed, addressed to me. My hands tightened around my clutch. The velvet rubbed rough against my palm. Inside was proof I belonged. Chloe's phone gleamed as she filmed, smiling without warmth. "She always shows up where she's not wanted," she said loud enough. My dress shimmered in the golden lake light. I had chosen it carefully, simple, soft blue, a quiet kind of elegant, but to them I looked like hired help. "Security," Karen called, tilting her wine glass. "Escort her out." Every eye turned. I could smell shrimp cocktail, sweet wine, lake water, and under it all, the sickening scent of shame. I heard my heart beat. I saw fingers tightening around glasses. I felt the burn on my cheeks. I didn't say a word, not yet, not until I saw him, Daniel. His suit was sharp charcoal gray with the silver pin from his firm. He moved toward me, eyes steady, lips set. "My wife," he said. His voice cut the air clean. Silence spread like a ripple. He looked at Karen, at Chloe, at everyone who'd laughed. "This venue," he said. "My firm sponsored it." A pause. He looked around. "She's not crashing, she's hosting." Karen's wineglass trembled. Chloe's phone slipped from her fingers, hitting the wooden floor with a soft crack. "She is the heart of this family," Daniel continued, eyes never leaving Karen's. "You just didn't notice." I stepped forward then. "I grew up being told I wasn't one of you," I said. My voice shook once, then steadied. "Today I say this, your control ends here." I pulled the invitation from my clutch, holding it up for everyone to see. "I'm not leaving, not now, not ever again." Gasps, a murmur. Even the seagulls paused. Daniel stood by my side, his hand at my back, but I stood on my own. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like I wasn't on the outside of my life anymore. And it only took 3 words from Karen to set everything in motion. "She's just the maid." "No, not anymore. Would you have stayed and faced them? Or walked away for good? Where are you listening from? Has anyone ever tried to erase you like this?" Subscribe for more true stories about justice, healing, and quiet revenge, only on Ian Reddit's story. I used to measure love by how quietly I could disappear. And in that house, I disappeared often. After my mother died, the silence moved in first. Then came Karen. She arrived with boxes, sharp heels, and that perfume cloying and citrusy, a scent that always meant the rules were changing. By the second week, my childhood bedroom was cleared out. "Chloe needs space," Karen said, holding my lamp like it belonged to her. Her daughter, all glossed lips and loud music, took the larger room. I was moved downstairs next to the washer and the furnace. That room smelled like damp carpet and old detergent. "You're not really ours, Emily," Karen told me once over morning coffee. She held her mug like a shield, not a comfort. I remember the clink of her spoon against the porcelain, steady and cold. At 15, I learned to stay small. I worked weekends at the strip mall, folding sweaters, spraying perfume, smiling until my face ached. Each paycheck went into a college fund I built alone. Karen never asked about my grades. But Chloe. She got a car on her 17th birthday. It was blue shiny, parked where my bike used to be. My father, Greg, tried, I think. He'd leave sticky notes sometimes. "Proud of you, Em." But over time, even those faded. Chloe filled the house, her laughter, her clothes, her trophies on the mantel. Mine stayed boxed under my bed. I wasn't angry back then, just erased. After graduation, I moved out without a party, without tears. Just a handshake from Greg, and Karen watching me load my used Corolla with secondhand books, and one suitcase said, "You're independent. You'll be fine." That was the last full sentence she spoke to me for almost 5 years. I rented a tiny studio near the university. Brick walls, rattling radiator. The fridge hummed like a lullaby. I taped my mom's picture above the stove, her laugh frozen mid-bite soup spoon in hand. No one handed me anything. I waited tables, tutored middle schoolers, shared library coffee with strangers who'd become friends. And one day, I walked across a small stage diploma in hand. No one clapped louder than the professor who'd written my last recommendation. That night, I poured cheap wine into a mug, alone and free. That's when I made a promise to myself. If I ever had a home again, it would never feel like the basement. I became a school counselor almost by accident. It started with a girl named Marley, 8th grade, always wore hoodies in July. When I asked her how she was doing, she stared like no one had ever asked before. She reminded me of me, quiet, observing, afraid to take up space. By then, I was 26, sharing an office with peeling paint and a humming AC unit that never quite worked. I hung a poster above my desk. "You are not too much." I believed it even when I didn't feel it. My apartment was small but warm. Mismatched mugs, thrifted armchair, a rug with corners that curled no matter how I flattened them. I lit lavender candles on weekends. Sometimes they reminded me of my mom. Sometimes they reminded me of Karen, and I had to blow them out. Greg passed when I was 33. The call came during lunch break. My sandwich went untouched, my tea cold. He died of a stroke. No final conversation. No time for apology. The funeral was beige. Karen in pearls. Chloe dabbing fake tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. When the will was read, I received a single line. "Emily is a self-sufficient adult and will understand." Understand what? That I meant so little. They kept the house, the savings, even his watch, the one he promised me when I was 10. He would have wanted Chloe to have it, Karen said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't cry. I thanked the lawyer, stepped outside, and vomited into a trash bin behind the building. For months I drifted, went to work, nodded through meetings. The students kept me grounded, their teenage heartbreaks oddly comforting. One evening I stayed late for a parent-teacher forum. That's when I met Daniel. He was standing near the coffee table, frowning at the cheap styrofoam cups. Tall, calm, overdressed for the event. His niece went to our school. He'd filled in for her father. We talked for 10 minutes, then 15 more. Then I forgot the time completely. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer. When he saw my apartment, he didn't flinch at the thrifted lamp or the chipped coffee table. He said, "This place feels like someone actually lives here." He didn't save me, but he sat beside me while I learned how to be safe. We married in a small ceremony in Lanesboro. No guests from my side, no regrets. I took his name not to erase mine, but to start something clean. And when I looked at him across our kitchen table Sunday morning, pancakes, coffee, and chipped mugs, I felt something I hadn't in years. Chosen. For years, I kept my past in a locked drawer. Daniel's world was polished. His firm hosted galas, his friends drove Teslas, and debated home chefs like sport. I was the anomaly, a counselor with scuffed heels and student loan debt. He never made me feel small, but I shrank anyway. At dinner parties, I smiled through stories I couldn't match. I nodded at remodel talks, estate plans, legacy funds. No one asked where I came from, and I never offered St. Paul. I told myself this piece is enough, this new life is mine, until the envelope came. Thick, expensive paper, embossed lettering, the kind you send when you want something. It was an invitation, the Larson family reunion. No return address, just a time, place, and line and script. "We'd love for you to join us, Emily." I stared at it for days. Daniel found it on the counter. "You okay?" he asked, handing me tea the way he always did when I looked unsettled. "It's nothing," I said. But it wasn't nothing. It was a ghost in the mailbox. I hadn't heard from Karen or Chloe in years. Not for birthdays, not when I moved, not when I got married. Why now? The event was at a lakeside pavilion just outside Minneapolis. It was beautiful, clean wood floors, hanging lanterns, string lights. Daniel's firm had renovated it the year before. He didn't realize the booking was for that Larson family, and I didn't tell him, not right away. I watched the RSVP card sit on the counter. It looked heavy even though it weighed nothing. Something inside me pulled, not out of longing, not to belong. But to end the story on my terms, "You think I should go?" I asked one night as the dishwasher hummed in the background. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Do it for you, not for them." So I did. I picked a dress I loved, not one meant to impress. I curled my hair, added lip balm, slipped on earrings my mom once wore, and I tucked the invitation into my clutch like a shield. I wasn't going to beg or prove anything, but if they wanted to see who I'd become, they would. The parking lot was full, but I still felt alone. I stepped out of the car slowly, the gravel crunching under my heels. The pavilion ahead shimmered with warm lights and soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. It looked like a postcard. Perfect, curated, like the life they always pretended we had. I walked in, holding my clutch tight, the invitation tucked inside like a passport. A woman in pearls glanced at me, smiled faintly, then looked away. She didn't recognize me. That was the thing about being erased. Eventually, people forget you were ever there. Inside, Karen was already laughing. Red lipstick, diamond studs, wine glass tilted just right. She moved like a politician, every gesture practiced. Chloe stood beside her mid-sentence, wearing some designer label I didn't recognize. When she spotted me, her lips curled. "Well," she said, drawing it out, "look who came to crash." "I was invited," I said quietly. "By who?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Dad's dead." The words hit sharper than expected, not because they weren't true, but because she said them like a punchline. Karen turned then. Her eyes skimmed me like scanning a grocery shelf. "You look," she paused, pretending to search for a word, "resourceful." I didn't flinch, not this time. "Nice venue," I said, glancing around. "Daniel's firm did the redesign. He's my husband." Her mouth twitched. A flicker of something. Surprise, jealousy, discomfort. It vanished fast. "Oh, Daniel, the architect?" She sipped her wine. "Interesting." That's when I knew. This wasn't a reunion, it was a test. They wanted to see how much of me was left. A waiter passed with hors d'oeuvres. I reached for one, but Chloe stepped in front of the tray. "Careful," she said, smiling too wide. "These have shellfish." I'm allergic to strawberries, not shrimp. She knew that. But she also knew the feeling of being warned in front of strangers. A cousin I barely remembered waved across the room, then turned away. Another aunt gave me a half hug, already looking past me. The weight of old ghosts pressed into my chest. I had braced myself for indifference, but I hadn't expected performance. To them, I was the act they were bored of watching. I stepped out onto the patio for air. The lake glittered under string lights. Cool breeze brushed my skin. Inside, the music swelled. Chloe laughed loud, deliberate. Karen's heels clicked as she gave a toast. Family is everything, she said. I closed my eyes. Even now, they were rewriting the story without me in it. I leaned against the wooden railing, breathing in lake air and holding back the weight behind my eyes. The lights blurred slightly, maybe from the breeze, maybe not. Footsteps approached, soft, careful. Emily. It was Aunt Marjorie, my father's sister, hair pinned neatly, cardigan folded over her arms. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said. Her voice had that mix of awkward fondness and something else. Guilt, maybe? "It's been a while," I said. She nodded, looking out toward the water instead of at me. "I heard you're a counselor now. Good for you." The pause stretched. Then, as if checking off a chore, she added, "Your father was proud of you, in his way. His way. A quiet text once a year, a fading sticky note on a fridge I no longer opened." I wanted to ask why no one called when he died, why no one reached out after the will, but I already knew the answer. Silence is easier when you convince yourself someone never really belonged. Inside, laughter erupted again, Karen's voice louder than the rest. Marjorie flinched slightly. "She means well," she offered. but her eyes didn't agree. I gave her a small smile. It didn't reach my chest. "Thanks for saying hi," I said gently. She touched my shoulder like she was afraid it would hurt me. Then she left. I stayed outside longer than I meant to. Watched ducks skim the lake. Watched the reflection of people who'd never seen me clearly. When I finally walked back in, Chloe was giving a speech, microphone in hand, smile wide eyes calculating. And none of this would have been possible without my mother. Her strength, her vision, her love for this family, especially after Dad passed. I stopped just behind the last row of chairs. She didn't mention me, didn't glance in my direction, didn't leave room for my name. A slideshow flickered to life behind her. Photos of childhood, vacations, holidays. Greg holding Chloe on his shoulders. Karen beaming in kitchens I once cleaned. The house dressed in twinkle lights. Not one image of me. Not one. I searched the frames like someone looking for proof they once existed. But in their version of history, I was never there. Not at birthdays, not at graduations, not even beside my father in the hospital. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was studying them and realizing the most painful thing of all, they had never expected me to come because they had never imagined I'd rise high enough to look them in the eye again. And now that I had, they didn't know where to put me. I moved to the side of the room, half shadowed by a pillar. No one noticed. That used to hurt. Tonight it gave me cover. A waiter passed again. I took a glass of water, this time my hand steady. I wasn't here for wine or to be liked. I was here to witness. A group of cousins gathered near the dessert table, joking about a trip to Aspen. Chloe was at the center. Her laugh rehearsed, her arm hooked around the shoulder of a new in-law. "She practically runs the Larson name now," someone said. "She should. She's the only one who stayed loyal to the family." I stared at the plate in her hand. It was one I'd scrubbed hundreds of times as a teenager. Same pattern, same chip on the rim. They hadn't changed the china, just who they thought deserved to hold it. "Emily," a sharp voice broke through. "Karen." She walked toward me, heels purposeful, smile tense. "We weren't expecting you to actually come," she said, tilting her head. Her pearls caught the chandelier light. "I got the invitation," I replied. "Formality," she waved her hand like swatting a fly. "Reunions are about celebrating shared stories. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable." I looked around. "Oh, I see, because I'm not in any of them." She didn't blink. "I didn't curate the photos. Did you curate the will too?" That landed, a slight twitch near her eye. "Greg made his choices," she said. "So did I answered. Her gaze swept my dress, my posture, the way I didn't shrink. Then she smiled. "Well, I'm sure you're doing fine." That word, fine. What people say when they want you to disappear politely. I stepped closer. "My husband's name is on the funding for this venue, the one you're sipping Cabernet in." Karen blinked just once, then her smile widened too fast. "That's lovely. Congratulations." "I didn't come here to reclaim space," I said. "I came to show you I never needed your permission to exist in it." For a second, just a flicker, something shifted in her eyes. Doubt. Before she could speak again, I walked away, not out of defeat, but out of decision. Let them sip wine and swap stories curated to erase me. I had my own now. Different faces, different homes, a husband who saw me, students who thanked me, a life not built to impress but to mean something. I stepped outside again into the night. The lake was quiet. Lanterns bobbed gently in the breeze, and across the dark glass of water I saw myself not as they painted me, but as I had chosen to be. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The lake outside our hotel window was still, like it was waiting. Daniel stirred beside me. "You okay?" he asked, voice husky. I nodded, but silence lingered too long between us. He reached for my hand. "I know that look," he said. "The one where you're replaying everything but pretending you're not." I smiled faintly. He knew me better than I like to admit. I don't think they ever saw me, I whispered, not even when I stood right in front of them. Daniel sat up, leaning on one elbow. They saw you, they just didn't want to admit it. His phone buzzed. Meeting reminder. Another day of blueprints and boardrooms. But I wasn't ready to leave the city yet. Not until I answered a question that burned in my chest. Was I forgotten, or was I erased on purpose? I went to the law office that had handled Greg's will. Same building, same wood-paneled hallway, same assistant with polite eyes. I gave my name. She hesitated, then led me in. Mr. Gaines had aged, but his gaze was sharp. I remember you, he said, gesturing to a chair. You came alone that day? Quiet, composed. Impressive, really. I need to see the will again, I said. And anything that changed in the last year before my father died. He frowned. You're not contesting anything, are you? No, I said. I'm just ready to understand. He studied me, then opened a drawer, pulled out a folder thick with signatures and footnotes. This version was signed 6 months before your father passed, he said. But there was an older draft, one that included you. He revised it later. I swallowed. Why? He hesitated. The note attached said updated per family discussions. Family discussions, not legal concerns, not financial strain. Did my father sign it alone, I asked. Yes, but Karen and Chloe were present, witnesses. Not legally required, but they insisted. My stomach sank. I could see it. Karen's hand on Greg's arm, Chloe's smile, the gentle pushing, the carefully worded doubts. She's doing fine on her own, Greg. She doesn't need this like we do. You know how strong she is. Weaponized praise. And he believed them. Maybe because he wanted peace. Maybe because he didn't want to fight near the end. But the outcome was the same. They didn't forget me. They removed me. I walked out of the office, gripping the folder like it could break skin. Downtown traffic pulsed around me, honking horns, flashing lights, the usual chaos, but I heard none of it. In that moment, I wasn't 38. I was 17 again. Watching Karen lean over my father's chair whispering, watching Chloe sit on the armrest like a princess in training. And me always standing behind the couch, too quiet, too polite. By the time I returned to the hotel, Daniel had gone to a site meeting. The room felt colder without him. I sat on the edge of the bed, folder open, looking at my name crossed out in ink. I ran my finger over the line. The handwriting was Greg's, shaky, uneven, still unmistakable. So many years of trying not to take up space. And here it was, made legal. I thought I was numb, but tears came anyway, slow, determined. Not for the money, not even for the house. But for the story they told him, that I was fine, that I didn't need a place in his final chapter. That night I stood on the balcony of our room. The lights from the pavilion still glowed faintly across the lake. Someone had left string lights on, maybe on purpose. I didn't hear the sliding door open, but I felt Daniel behind me. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around my waist, solid, still, steady. I found something out, I said. I think they talked him out of it, out of including me. He was quiet a moment. You sure? There was a draft. I was in it. Then I wasn't. They witnessed the change. Daniel exhaled, a slow, heavy sound. I turned to face him. It wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. He nodded. I believe you. I didn't need him to fix it. I just needed not to be alone in the knowing. You don't have to go back there, he said softly. Not tomorrow, not ever. I looked out across the dark water again. I think I do, just once more. Not to scream, not to beg, but to make sure they saw what I saw now. They didn't win because they took something. They lost because I lived without it. The next day, I returned to the reunion brunch. Karen looked surprised to see me again. I wore the same dress, not to impress, but to remind them that I didn't need to change clothes to change my worth. Chloe raised an eyebrow, back for seconds. I smiled. No, just closure. She blinked confused. Karen reached for her mimosa without a word. I sat down at the far end of the table, not with them, but across with Marjorie and two second cousins who actually asked how I'd been. Sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel, just a chair pulled out at the right moment. Karen stood to give her closing toast. She clinked her spoon lightly against her glass, that practiced smile already on her lips. I just want to thank everyone who made this reunion possible, she said, especially Chloe for organizing such a meaningful gathering. And of course, Greg, whom we miss deeply. All eyes turned toward the framed photo of my father perched in the center of the table. A candle flickered beside it. I stared at the image. His tie was crooked in that picture. I remembered fixing it before the photo was taken. No one mentioned that part. Karen went on, "We're proud of the legacy we carry forward. Greg built so much for us, and it's up to us to continue it." Us. That word scratched something inside me. I rose quietly, placing my napkin on the chair, not to cause a scene, but because silence had never served me well. "I think Greg built things for more than just us," I said. Karen froze. Chloe tilted her head. "Excuse me?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't shake, just let the truth land slowly. There was a version of the will where I was included. He wrote it, signed it. Gasps scattered. A fork clattered to the floor. I turned to Karen, but then it changed. "After one of your family discussions." Karen straightened. "I don't think this is the time." "It never was right," I said. "Never the time, never the place, never the daughter." Marjorie leaned forward. "There was another will?" I nodded. "It's on file. He didn't remove me for legal reasons. He did it because someone convinced him I didn't belong." Chloe scoffed. "Maybe he just knew you'd be fine. You always liked playing the victim." I stepped closer. "Don't confuse survival with weakness." Karen's mouth opened, but I didn't give her the space. "You already took the house, the savings, even his name as if it gave you history." I glanced at the photo again, but what you never earned was his decency. And you can't rewrite what you never lived. I walked out without slamming the door, just let it swing behind me slow and certain. Outside the air was crisp, the sky turning lavender. My heart thudded not from shame but relief. Behind me voices stirred, questions rose. But I didn't turn back, because sometimes the loudest kind of justice is simply refusing to be silent anymore. The hotel lobby was quiet when I returned. Muted jazz, a faint scent of lemon cleaner, normal things. But nothing inside me felt normal. I took the elevator alone, pressed the button for our floor with fingers still trembling, not from fear, but from everything I had held in and finally let out. In the room, Daniel looked up from his laptop. His eyes scanned my face before I even spoke. "You did it," he said softly. I nodded, then sat on the edge of the bed. The folder with Greg's will still lay on the desk, open, undisturbed, a reminder of the version of me they refused to see. "I wasn't angry in there," I whispered, not like I thought I'd be. Daniel walked over, knelt in front of me. "Because you've already outgrown their story." I placed my hand over his. It felt warm, real, but something cold still pulsed beneath my ribs. Not revenge, not bitterness. Just grief for what could have been. I thought closure would feel like a door slamming shut, clean, loud, final. Instead, it felt like dust settling, unseen, slow. Back in Minneapolis, the silence was louder. I returned to work on Monday. The school hallway buzzed with morning energy. Locker doors slammed. Someone spilled yogurt near the math wing. Normal chaos, comforting even. My office smelled like vanilla air spray and printed paper. I sat behind my desk and stared at the corner where Marley once curled into herself, hoodie over knees. I knew that posture. I used to sit like that, small, defensive, invisible. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had said what needed to be said. And even if it didn't change them, it had changed me. Still something lingered. Not unfinished business, but an idea, a shape forming in the quiet. Not vengeance, legacy. That night, I opened the storage bin beneath our bed. Inside were boxes I hadn't touched in years. One held photo albums, faded prints, corners peeling. Another held journals, receipts, a birthday card from Greg in college handwriting. But at the very bottom was something I hadn't remembered packing. A recipe card, my mother's handwriting, loopy firm, Sunday cinnamon toast. For M when the world feels too loud. I stared at it until the ink blurred. She had known, even then, that I'd grow up needing reminders of warmth. I took the card to the kitchen, lit a candle, made the toast. Cinnamon sugar and butter filled the apartment. I ate it slowly and let the tears fall not from sadness, but from softness, finally safe to feel. The next morning, a student lingered outside my office. Her name was Tiana, 15, smart, guarded. She hesitated at the door. "I'm not here for therapy," she mumbled. I smiled. "I'm not here to make you talk." She sat anyway, pulled at her sleeves. "I got kicked out of my cousin's place again. She said I'm too much." My breath caught. Too much, too emotional, too loud, too honest. The labels they use when they want you to vanish. "I've been there," I said. She looked up. "You?" More than once. We didn't talk long. She left with a granola bar and a laminated list of community shelters, but her eyes softened before she closed the door. And that softness stayed with me. That night I couldn't sleep. Daniel was out of town for a project. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I turned on the lamp beside the couch and opened my laptop. Typed slowly like my hands were afraid to speak the truth. What if we built something for the ones they left behind? A space for kids like Tiana. A room with cinnamon toast and posters that don't lie. A place where too much means you've survived more than most. I didn't know what it would become, but I knew I couldn't let the story end with me walking away from a brunch. That wasn't the legacy I wanted. 3 days later, I scheduled a meeting with Principal Owens. I brought coffee and a folder, inside a draft outline budget ideas, notes scribbled on sticky pads, and a name. Second seat, a program for teens who never got one. "I don't want it to be therapy," I said. "Just a space, somewhere kids can feel claimed." He flipped through the papers, nodding slowly. "And you'll lead it?" "I'll build it, with your blessing. With grants, donations, whatever it takes." Owen set the folder down. "You've always had the heart for this, Emily." His words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Not because they were new, but because this time I believed them. By the weekend, I was on the phone with a local nonprofit, then a grant writer, then Daniel, who paused during a site inspection just to say I'm in. "Whatever you need." I hadn't asked him yet. He just knew. We turned our guest room into an idea wall, sticky notes, timelines, paint swatches. A secondhand corkboard held our mission. A seat at the table for every kid they tried to erase. Every moment of doubt I'd ever felt, every slammed door, every quiet brunch, every blank space in the photo albums was now fuel. Late Sunday night, I received an email from Marjorie. Subject: lunch. The body was only one line. "I think I owe you more than a photo." I stared at the screen, then typed back. "Tuesday, 1 o'clock, that old diner near Lexington if it's still standing." Maybe it would be awkward, maybe it would be nothing, but maybe it would be the first time someone chose to see me without being forced.
Yay.
As I lay in bed, I thought about what Karen might do when she learned I wasn't just walking away. I was building something stronger than any inheritance. Not for revenge, but because the best way to unwrite erasure is to create something permanent. Not loud, not cruel. Just undeniable. The diner on Lexington hadn't changed. Same chipped red booths, same lemon pie in the rotating case. Same waitress with a pen tucked in her ponytail. I chose a booth by the window. My hands were still, but my stomach wasn't. Marjorie arrived 5 minutes late. No coat, just a worn cardigan, and a look I hadn't seen before. Something between nervous and hopeful. She sat across from me, took off her glasses, and stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. I should have said something sooner. I didn't interrupt. I saw the draft, Will, she continued, voice low. Greg showed it to me, said he wanted you to have your mother's locket. And part of the lake house. The locket. I hadn't even asked about it. Hadn't let myself hope. But then he changed it, she said. I didn't know why. I didn't want to ask. I looked out the window. You didn't have to ask. You knew. Marjorie winced. I was scared of losing what little connection we had left. I nodded slowly. Honesty doesn't always come with grace. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small velvet box. I found this in Greg's drawer after the funeral. Karen never touched it. Said it was old junk. She slid it across the table. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I met her eyes. You reached out. That matters. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something in the silence shifted. A fracture. Maybe the beginning of something better. That night, I placed the box on my desk, opened it carefully. Inside was the locket. Faded gold, warm to the touch. Inside, a photo of my mother and a slip of paper with my name handwritten. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I was finally past begging for belonging. The next morning, I pulled up the Larson Family Foundation website. It was public. It listed Karen as chairwoman, Chloe as communications director, and a short paragraph about honoring Greg's legacy by supporting youth development. Youth development. I stared at that phrase for a full minute. Then I opened my email, typed a letter, attached my credentials, outlined my experience, and formally requested an audit of the foundation's community partnerships. Not to burn it down, but to ask the one question they'd never expected me to say out loud: are you truly doing what he would have wanted? The reply came 2 days later. A polite email, stamped with the foundation's letterhead, signed by someone named Whitney, Karen's assistant likely. Thank you for your inquiry. All partnership and audit requests must go through our board review process. We'll be in touch within 60 days. 60 days, just enough time to forget, or hope I would. But I had no intention of waiting. I met with Layla, a woman who ran a local mentorship nonprofit downtown. We sat in her office surrounded by shelves of grant binders and volunteer rosters. The air smelled like ink and ambition. She listened. Didn't blink when I told her what the Larson Foundation claimed to stand for. Didn't flinch when I showed her the real numbers, how little was actually being distributed to schools and youth centers. I've tried applying for a grant from them for years, she said. Nothing but form letters. Meanwhile, they throw charity galas that cost more than my yearly operating budget. I nodded. Then maybe it's time we show people what real support looks like. I pulled out my folder for Second Seat. Mission statement, pilot plan, community partners. She read in silence, then looked up. I want in. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the living room floor. Blueprints spread across the rug, a steaming pizza box between us, the TV muted, just background light. You're building something that can outlive all of them, he said. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I leaned against his shoulder. I don't need revenge, I whispered. I need truth. I need legacy. Daniel reached into a side folder and handed me a small envelope. I called a friend on the foundation's board, he said. He owed me a favor. Inside was a donor list, corporate sponsors, tax filings. One name jumped out. Whitmore Architecture Group, Daniel's company. His face was calm. We've donated every year since before I met you, through an automated fund. My breath caught. And now it ends tomorrow. He reached for my hand. You're not just asking questions, you're shifting power. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread. Karen's foundation received multiple inquiries. Community partners withdrew quietly. One school district publicly declined a grant citing lack of equitable outreach. No headlines, no front-page scandal, just a slow unraveling of the perfect facade. And behind the scenes, Second Seat launched its first pilot event in the gym of the very school I once worked at. 50 students, 4 counselors, 1 goal. No one gets erased here. The gym still smelled like linoleum and old basketballs. But that afternoon, it was filled with folding chairs, warm lights, and something new. Laughter that wasn't forced. Stories that weren't filtered. Eyes that didn't look away. I stood near the snack table watching Tiana help set out bottled water. Her hoodie sleeves were rolled halfway up this time. She smiled, awkward but real. "You built this," Daniel said beside me. "No," I said. "They did. I just finally made room for it." At the back of the room, Layla gave a short speech about belonging, the kind of speech Karen would have turned into a press release. But here, no cameras, no curated optics, just truth unpolished and personal. When the session ended, a girl named Audrey pulled me aside. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you the one who started this?" "I'm part of it," I said. She looked at her shoes. "My aunt says I'm too dramatic, too loud, but here, they said I'm brave." I knelt a little so we were eye to eye. You've always been. They just didn't want to see it." Her eyes filled. She didn't speak again, just nodded and walked back to her friends. That night I received a voicemail from Karen. Her tone was clipped formal. "Emily, I've been informed about your involvement in the audit request and Daniel's withdrawal of support. I think you're making this unnecessarily personal." I played it twice, then deleted it. No reply, no explanation, because some chapters don't deserve epilogues, just endings. A week later, the Larson Foundation updated their board listing. Karen stepped down. Chloe's name disappeared. No announcement, no ceremony. Just absence finally in the right place. Dang. I kept the locket in my coat pocket during Second Seat's launch week. Sometimes I touched it mid-conversation, not for luck, but for grounding. My mother had worn it through her own silences. Now it sat against my palm while I broke mine. Legacy doesn't have to be loud. It just has to last. And justice doesn't always knock on the front door. Sometimes it enters through a side hallway, quiet, certain, and permanent. March in Minneapolis is a strange thing. Snow still clings to sidewalks, but the sun starts showing up like an apology. Daniel and I sat at our small kitchen table, 2 mugs, 1 open laptop, and a spreadsheet of dreams. Second Seat was real now. Not an idea, not a draft. A living program with counselors, volunteers, and a waiting list. I watched as Daniel typed in a new budget line: facility expansion, South District. My throat tightened. "This is bigger than I thought," I said. He nodded. "It was always bigger. You just finally saw it." I leaned back in my chair. The hum of the radiator filled the silence. Legacy used to be a word other people owned. Now it felt like a tool in my hands. A week later, I stood in front of an auditorium crowd. Local donors, school board members, 3 youth shelter directors, and Layla front row smiling like I'd already won. I wasn't wearing heels, just navy slacks and the same blouse I wore when I interviewed for my first counselor job. Familiar fabric, grounded feet. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up. Second Seat claiming space for the erased. I told them about the pilot, about Tiana, about the girl who whispered. They said I'm brave. I told them about myself, too. Not the full family history, just the truth that mattered. I know what it feels like to be left out of the story. I also know the power of writing your own. When the lights came back on, there was no applause, just stillness, and then one clap, then another, and then the room joined, not loud but sure. Afterward, an older woman approached me, hand soft coat buttoned to the neck. "My granddaughter's in your program," she said. She stopped skipping school, started asking questions about college again. She reached into her purse and handed me a folded envelope. "This is for the next girl who thinks no one sees her." When I opened it that night, it held a check for $10,000. No note, just belief. We filed paperwork for nonprofit status the next day. Daniel helped build the site plan for our first standalone facility. Layla gathered a list of regional mentors. I scheduled meetings with community schools, offering Second Seat as a partner, not a charity. No press, no headlines. But the phone rang more often now. And this time, it wasn't Karen calling. It was principals, mothers, survivors. It was a Tuesday morning when the email came. Subject: Larson Foundation Legacy. Gala, April 27th, from events@larsonfamilyfoundation.org. I almost deleted it without opening, but something in me paused. It was a mass invitation, formal tone, Karen listed as Chair Emerita, Chloe as Program Director, Family Impact. The words practically glittered with self-congratulation. I read the last line twice. Honoring Greg Larson's vision for community and inclusion. Inclusion. I let the word hang there. It felt like acid wrapped in ribbon. That evening, I sat with Daniel on the couch, feet tucked beneath me, laptop open. "I'm not going," I said. "I know," he replied. "But I want our presence felt." He raised an eyebrow, waited. So I told him we'd host a parallel event. Same night, same city, same word in our title, but redefined. And Second Seat, a night of true inclusion. Planning began the next morning. Layla secured a mid-size event hall near the Riverwalk. Clean lines, open space, no pretense. Daniel handled lighting and staging through one of his firm's vendors. I reached out to the students. Tiana, Audrey, a dozen others ready to speak, sing, show artwork. This wasn't about making noise. It was about planting a flag. The press release was simple, published through our site. But while others speak of legacy, we build it in real time with real lives. Second Seat invites you to witness the power of what happens when stories are no longer erased. No names mentioned, no comparisons drawn, but the timing said enough. A week before the gala, I received a call. "Karen." I let it go to voicemail. Then played it once on speaker. "I'm not sure what you think you're doing, Emily, but this bitterness isn't noble. You could have joined us. We left that door open." Daniel didn't even flinch. I stared at the screen. I wanted to call back, to ask where that door was when I was 15 alone in the basement, where it was when she whispered, "You're not really ours." But I didn't need the answers anymore. I had built my own house. And the door, it stayed open for anyone who needed it. By Friday, RSVPs outnumbered our original capacity. Local press requested interviews, not because of scandal, because of the kids. They were the story now. We were just the stage. April 27th arrived cold and bright. Sunlight glinted off the glass windows of the event hall Daniel helped design. Inside, folding chairs stood in neat rows. A makeshift stage hugged the back wall. No chandeliers, no velvet ropes, just warmth. A banner hung across the front. Second Seat, a night of true inclusion. No one forgotten, no one erased. Layla wore a navy jumpsuit and her signature gold earrings. Daniel adjusted the stage lights himself, said he didn't trust anyone else with it. I stood in the wings, holding a printed program. Tiana was first. She stepped onto the stage in sneakers and a denim jacket. She cleared her throat. "I used to think no one noticed when I disappeared," she said. "But Second Seat saw me, not just the broken parts, all of me." She paused. A tear ran down her cheek, but she didn't crumble. I want to be a teacher, that's all, that's everything. Applause rose, gentle, rising, real. Next was Audrey with a painting titled, What Belonging Looks Like. Then Marcus spoke in word. Then Samira with a poem she said she'd never dared read aloud before. I stayed backstage most of the night, watching, letting it be theirs. But near the end, Layla took the mic, and now she said the woman who built the seat I didn't even know I'd been waiting for. I stepped into the light. The room quieted. I looked around at folding chairs filled with kids, social workers, teachers, women with eyes that had seen silence. I grew up believing there wasn't room for me, I began. And for a while, I acted like that was true. I paused, took one breath, then another. But stories can be rewritten. Tonight is proof. Not because we made noise, but because we made space. I held up a chair from the side of the stage, plain wood paint chipped. The kind you'd find in a school basement. This is what they gave us, I said. But look what we built from it. That night, local press ran a story titled, "A Second Seat Steals the Spotlight. A Community Rises Without Permission." The Larson Foundation Gala barely made the lifestyle column. A photo of Karen and Pearls, Chloe with a forced smile, no mention of inclusion, only legacy. But that word didn't belong to them anymore. Back home, I placed the chip chair in the corner of my office, next to the locket, next to the framed photo of Tiana's speech printed by Daniel. Legacy, I realized, isn't what you inherit. It's what you refuse to lose. The news broke quietly. A small headline on the nonprofit blog circuit. Audit finds misalignment in legacy-based grant programs. No names, no quotes. Just numbers, percentages, and the words inconsistent with mission. Within hours, the Larson Foundation's homepage quietly went offline. I didn't celebrate, I just made tea. Sat by the window, watched spring finally melt the last of winter off the sidewalk. Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just comes with silence from the people who used to drown you out. 2 days later, I got a text from Layla. Karen stepping down, boards cleaning house. They want to meet with you. I stared at the message. Daniel looked up from across the table. You don't have to go, he said. I know, I replied, but I think I will. Not for closure, not even for legacy. For the record. The conference room felt cold, modern, bare. Karen sat at the end, flanked by 2 board members. No pearls today, just a black blazer and a jaw clenched too tight. She didn't stand. Chloe wasn't there. The board chair, a woman named Regina, gestured toward the seat opposite. Thanks for coming, Ms. Whitmore. I sat, unfolded my hands, looked straight at Karen. Regina continued. Due to recent findings and external pressure from community leaders, we're restructuring the foundation. We're aware of your efforts through Second Seat and would like to explore a formal partnership. Karen flinched slightly at the word partnership. I didn't react, not yet. Regina looked at me directly. You don't have to say yes, but your work speaks louder than their press kits ever did. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I never meant to erase you. I raised my eyebrows. Didn't you? Silence. Then I leaned forward, voice calm. I'm not here to be acknowledged. I came because you used Greg's name to build something hollow. Now I'm building something real, and people notice the difference. Karen's eyes dropped. Her shoulders finally fell like a performance winding down. Regina smiled. Regardless of your decision, your presence here has changed how we do things. I stood, smoothed my blouse. I accept your restructuring, but I don't need your validation. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, I said. Greg left something behind. Not money, not houses. He left me. And I'm still here. I walked out without looking back. 3 days after the board meeting, Chloe finally called. Unknown number, no voicemail. Just her name on the screen, 5 letters that used to define every closed door in my childhood. I didn't answer. Instead, I brewed coffee and opened the newspaper. Second seat had made the Sunday human interest column. A photo of Audrey mid-laugh, hands covered in paint. A quote from Tiana about finally having somewhere that feels like mine. No mention of me, just the way I wanted it. Later that evening, Layla forwarded an email from Press, Larson Family Foundation, org, subject, media clarification regarding program shifts. I read the first line out loud. The Larson Foundation is undergoing a strategic transition to better reflect evolving community needs and expectations. Daniel chuckled. That's a long-winded way of saying we got called out and can't recover. I didn't smile, not out of cruelty, but because I'd already moved on. The next weekend, I visited the lake house. Not to reclaim it, not even to confront it, just to walk the edges of something that used to haunt me. It was for sale now, listed under a new broker with modern upgrades and prestige potential. I parked across the street, watched as a couple with matching Patagonia jackets toured the yard. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but grief always makes things seem larger. A child, maybe 7, ran up the steps. She held a stick like a magic wand, shouting, "This is my castle." Her mother laughed from behind. "Then you better protect it well." I didn't cry, but something inside me let go. Back home, I found the velvet box again, opened it slowly, held the locket in my palm. Not because I missed the past, but because I wanted to anchor the future. I placed it in a display frame on my bookshelf, next to a plaque Daniel had surprised me with, and second seat founded by the girl who made room. On Monday, I returned to the school. A new student had joined the program, Maya, 14, quiet with eyes that tracked every movement like a hawk. She didn't speak for the first 2 sessions, but on the third, she stayed behind. "I read about you," she said. "You didn't give up." "No," I replied, but not because I was strong, because I was tired of feeling erased. She nodded once. "Same." We didn't say anything more. Some victories don't need words, just presence. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter in the mail, thick paper, black ink, embossed letterhead, Larson Family Foundation. I opened it slowly, not out of fear, out of curiosity. Inside, a single-page statement from the board. They acknowledged internal inconsistencies, expressed gratitude for past leadership, and officially named Second Seat as one of their new community grant recipients. I read the last line twice. That we recognize the value of programs that reflect both lived experience and long-term vision. No apology, no signature from Karen. But it didn't matter, because this time the truth was printed in ink, and it had my fingerprints all over it. The following Saturday, I found myself back at the pavilion. Not for a reunion, not for revenge. The space had been rented out for a citywide youth wellness fair, organized in part by Layla and the Second Seat team. Kids laughed near food trucks, local bands played under string lights, and I stood at the same railing where Karen once called me the Maid. Tiana joined me sipping soda. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. This place used to feel like something I'd never get back. She tilted her head, and now I looked around. "It feels claimed, not for me, for us." She smiled, then handed me a flyer she designed. Across the top in bold, "Your story is not a footnote." I folded it carefully and tucked it in my bag. As the sun dipped low, Daniel wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. "Do you realize what you've done?" he whispered. I leaned back against him. "No, remind me." He kissed my temple. "You rewrote a legacy without burning anything down. That's rarer than people think. I turned to face him. The lake behind us still, my reflection clear, whole. That night as I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number, just one sentence. I guess I never knew how much you mattered. Chloe. I stared at it for a moment, then turned the screen off. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it to matter anymore. Some justice doesn't come with confrontation. Some closure doesn't need a reply. Justice had arrived, not in flames, but in something quieter. Steady, unmistakable, mine. A year passed quietly. No headlines, no follow-ups, just life. Second Seat moved into a new building, small, bright, with big windows and floors that echoed with young voices. The kind of place I used to dream of when I was 15 and invisible. Daniel designed the layout himself. He placed the front door facing east so every morning the light would hit first. Hope, he said, should never enter through the back. I still kept my day job at the school. The hallway chatter, the smell of pencils and hallway cleaner, it grounded me. Sometimes I'd pass students wearing Second Seat t-shirts, laughing in corners where they used to hide. And I'd think, you're seen now, that's enough. Marjorie and I had lunch once a month. We never talked about Karen. Sometimes we mentioned Greg, but mostly we talked about books about her neighbor's cat, about how hard it was to find a decent coffee cake these days. Forgiveness wasn't a thunderclap. It came slowly, like a window cracked open, 1 inch at a time. Karen moved out of state. I learned this through Layla, who heard it from someone at the foundation. No farewell, no closure. And strangely, I didn't need one. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's just no longer checking the door. Chloe started a podcast. I listened to one episode. She spoke about legacy, about how families fracture, about how some stories are still healing. She didn't say my name, but I heard the edges of guilt. I didn't resent her for it, not anymore. Some people cling to spotlight because they fear silence. Me, I'd learned to live inside it, then build something louder from it. On my bookshelf, the locket still sat in its frame. Next to it, a new edition, a letter from a former student. It read, I don't know if you remember me, but you made me feel like I wasn't a mistake. That changed everything. I folded the paper slowly, placed it under the glass. Legacy protected. The day we opened the second location of Second Seat, it rained. Not a downpour, just steady, quiet rain, like the sky was letting go of something too. I stood under a blue awning as students and parents filtered in. Some carried umbrellas, some didn't bother. One girl, maybe 12, wore a yellow jacket 2 sizes too big. She stopped in front of our door and stared at the sign. Second Seat, you belong here. She didn't move for a moment, just looked. Then slowly, almost shyly, she walked inside. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the office floor, surrounded by leftover paper cups, rolled-up posters, and half a tray of brownies. He leaned his head on my shoulder. We should hire a director, he said. I laughed. A director. You can't run everything forever, Em. He was right, and I'd known it. Second Seat had become more than a program. It was a network now. Inquiries from out of state, requests for templates, partnerships with schools I'd never even visited. But most importantly, it was no longer mine alone. The next week I called Tiana. She'd just finished her second year of college, early childhood development. She picked up on the second ring, Miss Whitmore. I smiled. I think it's time you called me Emily. She laughed, nervous. I have a job for you, I said. And no, it doesn't involve filing papers. She was silent. Then what kind of job? I looked around the room at the chairs, the books, the empty tea mugs, at everything we'd built. The kind that puts you in charge of the seat you earned. The kind that makes sure no one ever feels like they don't belong. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time, not planning, not leading, Just remembering.
Hi.
Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you place into someone else's hands while you're still here to see what they do with it. And watching Tiana take that first step, that was the real inheritance. Spring returned, this time not as apology, but as reward. The cherry blossoms bloomed early near the school parking lot. I walked beneath them one morning, coffee and handbag, slung over my shoulder. Light filtered through the petals like forgiveness. Not the dramatic kind, the kind you give yourself. I kept my office at the school smaller now, a little messier. There were fewer photos of Greg, more photos of the kids, drawings, notes, scribbled thank yous taped to the wall with crooked lines and honest spelling. One read, "You didn't make me feel better. You made me feel real." That one stayed above my desk. On the first anniversary of Second Seat, we hosted an open house. Students gave tours. Tiana spoke on stage. Audrey had her art displayed across one wall. I watched from the back, hands folded, no clipboard, no spotlight. A woman approached me during cleanup, gray hair, soft eyes. "My daughter was part of the first cohort," she said. "She never talks about her father anymore. She talks about you." I nodded slowly. "Tell her I said it was always her story. I just helped her pick up the pen." That night, Daniel and I sat on the apartment balcony, the same thrifted chairs, the same soft hum of city life below. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key, gold, new, heavy. I looked at him puzzled. "It's for the new center," he said. "Tiana insisted you should have the first one." I turned the key in my hand. Cool, solid, steady. "I never thought this would be my life," I whispered. Daniel smiled. "Then I'm glad life didn't ask for your permission." Across the street, a group of kids ran by laughing. A girl with braids yelled, "I got the last seat." Her friends groaned and chased her down the block. I smiled because I knew that seat, it would never be the last again. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a door that never shuts. Sometimes it sounds like your own name spoken with respect. And sometimes it looks like a room full of kids who finally believe they matter. Have you ever had to build your own seat at the table? What does justice look like in your life, quiet or loud? Where are you listening from? We'd love to hear your story. Subscribe to Ian Reddit Story for more true stories of healing legacy and quiet empowerment after 35.